Today's content that we are reacting to comes from WesHammer. Please support his channel, and the original video will be in the description. Thank you. Welcome to A Christian Reacts, and today we're going to be reacting to Leaked Document Exposes the Truth About Souls and Gods from WesHammer. Before we get into the video, I owe you guys an apology. Last video was terrible. I talked way too much, and I'm just going to let these guys talk more. And what I do is I bring similar biblical topics that the video was talking about. So like today, I'm going to be bringing up where do souls go in the Bible. And I'll bring that up right at the beginning. And I don't always do it, but sometimes I'll bring scriptures up at the beginning so we can kind of get in the mindset. But I basically do commentary / react videos or reactions. So that's how I differentiate myself from other reactors, as I bring the biblical side of things. Anyways, if you like what you see, please consider a like and subscription, as that really helps the channel out a lot. And share it, and that really helps out too. And share it to yourself or to all platforms if you can. And I also do a Warhammer 40k lore in the Bible shorts. If you want to check those out, check out my short section on my page. All right, so we're going to check out the scripture, and we're going to be talking about this gulf where the souls, are separated. One is the Garden of Eden, Abraham's bosom, and I'm going to make the case for that. And then, of course, hell, right? Anyways, we're going to start in Luke 16, chapter 22. And it came to pass that the beggar was departed and was carried away by the angel into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also departed, was buried. And hell lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. So you can see, Abraham tells him, you're getting what you deserve, basically, right? But we're going to see here in verse 26. And beside all this, between us, us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us. That would come from thence. So they can't go to each other, right? And there's this great gulf. All right, we're going to see this in Enoch chapter 22. Oops. That's a little bit further. Okay, verse 3. And then Raphael, or we'll go to here. So, and he answered me, and he said unto me, These three have been made, that the spirits of the departed might be separated. And such a division has been made. So this gulf, right? The spirits of the righteous, in which there is a bright spring of water, which is in the Garden of Eden, right? And such has been made for sinners, when they are departed and are buried in the earth, and judgment has not been executed on them in their lifetime. So, where is Abraham's bosom? Right? What is it? Ezekiel 31:18, or 17 and 18. They also went down into hell with them, and to them that be slain with the sword. They that were his armies, talking about the Assyrian, right? Second in command. You got Satan, and then you got this Assyrian character who shows up in the Bible a lot. This guy. Ezekiel 31, same chapter. Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude. Whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon. And by the way, it says he was in the Garden of Eden. You can check that throughout the chapter here. But we're going to see the Garden of Eden goes down into the nether parts here. Ready? And that dwelt under a shadow in the midst of the heathen. To whom art thou thus like in glory, and in greatness among the trees of Eden? Ready? Yet thou shalt be brought down with the trees of Eden unto the nether parts of the earth. And thou shalt lie in the midst of the uncircumcised with them that be slain by the sword. This is Pharaoh and all his multitude, saith the Lord God. Right? So this is Syrian. Who is the Pharaoh king of Egypt? Ra. Right? And in the Bible, in the Passover story, he's also called the destroyer. Right? And he is named the destroyer. It says the Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and that it is in his heart to destroy nations, not a few. It literally identifies him as the destroyer as well. The same guy that is Apollyon or Abaddon, the angel of the bottomless pit. Right? And we see here he's going down into the pit with the Garden of Eden, all right, to hell or whatever. Or in the pit, yes. Sorry. But anyways. Oh, wait, and I'm not done yet. I'm sorry. Let's go to verse 26. We're going to see here. And I went from thence to the middle of the earth, and I saw a blessed place, in which there were trees, with branches abiding and blooming, of a dismembered tree. I wonder which tree that was. And there I saw a holy mount. Underneath the mountain in the east, there was a stream, and it flowed towards the south. Right? And then when Jesus went to the lower parts of the earth, he brought that Garden of Eden back up to heaven. Right? Because he says to the thief, he says, today you will be with me in paradise, right? Eden, in my opinion, anyways. All right, so there you go. You got the two places of where the righteous go and then the bad guys go, right? Or the people who didn't accept God.
Spend an eternity being ripped apart. In the grimdark future of Warhammer 40k, what happens when somebody dies? When a guardsman of the Astra Militarum falls in battle, what happens to their soul? Does it get a happy ending and ascend to a higher state of being alongside the God Emperor, or is the soul condemned to spend an eternity being ripped apart by hungering demons? This is a question that has plagued mankind for tens of thousands of years. The Ecclesiarchy says all those who dedicate their lives to the worship of the God Emperor are rewarded with a spot in his celestial army after death. However, other factions like the Eldari, who have been marked by the chaos god Slanesh, claim there is nothing but endless suffering for all of the lost souls sent shrieking into the afterlife. Still, other more science-y types claim that there is nothing beyond the veil, simply the silence of oblivion. But what exactly is the truth? Is it possible that all of these factions are right to one extent or the other? What actually is a soul?
That is, I'll just say this. God gives everybody a piece of the puzzle, right? In a different way of seeing things, right? In a different perspective. But that's my opinion. So there we go.
Soul, and how do they work? Unfortunately, this is a question that the lore of 40k normally isn't super clear on. The few times it does seem to actually spell it out for us, it will also immediately contradict itself in another source. Needless to say, this has led to a lot of confusion in the fanbase and everyone having a slightly different interpretation of the text. But what if I was to tell you there was a document most people haven't read that spelled everything out in explicit detail? One that was meant to be passed between the authors behind the scenes at Games Workshop and never released to the public. A document that, of course, ended up leaking onto the internet. In comes A Guide to the Fictional Background of Chaos in GW Games by Rick Priestley, one of the founding fathers of 40k. I'll be honest, I had never heard of this particular article until I stumbled upon it by chance while gathering source material to research for this video. And I gotta tell you, it was one of the most extraordinary and insightful pieces of 40k literature that I've ever read. So of course I had to make a video about it, telling you all the juicy insights I found. In this video, we're going to get to the bottom of how a soul is created when a person is born and what happens to it when they die. We're going to talk about each classification of soul and how the afterlife differs for all of them. We're going to talk about how gods and their souls are created, how they grow stronger, and what impact they have on our universe and the immaterium. We're also going to get into how the Chaos Gods and the Emperor of Mankind are the same, and importantly, the key elements that set them apart. We're going to talk about all that and a whole lot more in this video, as there's...
that could be why, how the Emperor still has kind of his, still alive, I guess, per se, or whatever, in the warp. And that's where, like, the saints and all that, right? It's like Saint Celestine and stuff like that in his army and whatnot. And I guess you could say the warp. But, I forgot where I was going with that. But anyways,
there's a lot to talk about. But before we dive headfirst into the Grimdark, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Rocket Money, and
okay, we'll get you that. I'm sure you guys, if you guys want to watch the original video, it's there. So if you want to check that out, you get to the Uh-oh.
Started for free. Big thanks to Rocket Money for
Uh,
still have to briefly cover it for all the newcomers, but I'll make it quick. In 40K, there are two parallel universes that every living creature exists in simultaneously. The Materium, also known as the physical universe, and the Immaterium, also known as the Warp or the Sea of Souls. The Materium is a realm of logic, physics, matter, and all things tangible, whereas the Immaterium is a realm of energy, concepts, emotions, and ideas. Our physical bodies
in the Bible, there's a thing called the outer darkness, which is very interesting. Because let's say in the book of Adam and Eve, it talks about how the good angel, Satan, in my opinion, had this bright nature, but when he disobeyed God, all of a sudden this darkness started, and it said this darkness overcame him and overtook him. So that's interesting. But anyways,
exist in the Materium, while our souls exist in the Immaterium. Although it's tempting to think of both of them as two separate places, and in some senses they are, more realistically, the two universes are one and the same. They are two sides of the same coin. Likewise, everything that happens in one has a direct effect on the other. Now, although the thought
yep, and in the prayer that Jesus says, right? He says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Right? He also says, what is bound on earth is bound in heaven. Right? So it's kind of the same concept here.
thoughts, beliefs, and systems of categorizing all things related to the spiritual and supernatural will vary from faction to faction. Broadly speaking, we can categorize souls into 5 distinct categories: souls, lost souls, drifting souls, powerful souls, and spirits. So let's talk about each of them, and we'll start with your just run-of-the-mill baseline souls.
The peasant
When a
souls.
person is born, an invisible tether known as an anchor is formed and cast into the Immaterium, where it latches onto
That is kind of almost like string theory, kind of, right? Where you got this vibration or whatever that's going somewhere, right? Anyways.
a cluster of energy and binds it together. This cluster is what we refer to as a soul, and throughout the entirety of this creature's life, the soul will remain tethered to their body via the anchor. Now, souls are not aware, they're not conscious, or even technically alive. They're a little more than a coherent lump of raw energy that can be drawn upon and used as a source of power. This can be done consciously by psychers and sorcerers, or unconsciously by individuals with latent psychic abilities. However, one does not need to be able to conjure fireballs out of thin air, utilize telekinesis, or read minds in order to draw upon their soul's power. Every living thing does this at one point in time or another throughout their life, normally in moments of extremity. That spike of adrenaline and heightened awareness we experience when we or a loved one is in danger, that's us briefly tapping into the power source of our souls. Just like how a body decays and breaks down into its constituent parts after death, all of which eventually return to the earth, the same thing happens with a soul. Whereas our bodies are constructed from tangible matter such as water, salt, carbon, sulfur, etc., so too is the soul constructed from intangible matter.
Right. That's why, Jesus says, right, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's, right?
Dreams, thoughts, ideas, memories, beliefs, and of course every human emotion are all energy, i.e. components of a soul. After death, the anchor that binds the body to the soul is severed, and with nothing to bind its energy together and nothing to tether it in place, the raw material of the soul is cast adrift amongst the other raw materials of the warp. An untethered soul that has broken apart like this is called a lost soul, and after a soul becomes lost, there's no way to get it back. It'd be like trying to retrieve a single raindrop that has fallen into the ocean. However, every ounce of energy that was originally part of that soul will eventually be recycled and used in the construction of many new souls in the future. Just like how the elements and minerals that originally made up our body will one day be used in the creation of another one as well. Now, although it's rare, there are souls that manage to not dissolve in this way and stay fully intact after a creature's death. These fully formed souls that have been cast adrift and are no longer tethered are what we call drifting souls. A drifting soul retains an essence of the most deeply held emotions or thoughts that characterized its owner in life. They still don't have any kind of consciousness of their own, however, and will end up drifting freely through the warp until they meet and coalesce with souls of a similar nature, all of them becoming part of a greater whole. Over time, these masses of spiritual energy will grow stronger and stronger, eventually gaining a personality and sentience of their own. These masses are held together by common emotions and belief. In this way, the emotions and beliefs of all living.
By the way, I found a god in the Bible named Nurgle. That's the god of disease and all that. It's in 2 Kings, but I'm gonna save that for a short that I'm gonna do coming up. Actually, probably one of the next ones. But anyways,
Living creatures affect the warp itself.
I'm guessing that's where they got it from.
As a person ages and builds up a collection of memories, experiences, and beliefs, their souls will grow stronger and more defined. In the grand scheme of things, most of these souls are not particularly remarkable, but every now and then, an individual will craft what is known as a powerful soul. But this is something that is primarily reserved for full-blown psychers or individuals with latent potential. Whether
I'm guessing, are these like saints and stuff like that is what I'm guessing.
or not they ever become aware of their abilities during their lifetime. Either way, when the
Or
owner
like,
of a powerful soul dies,
I should say like a Saint Celestine type.
their consciousness is transferred intact to their soul, meaning unlike other types of souls, these souls are fully aware whilst they are in the immaterium. A soul that is animated by consciousness is referred to as a spirit. You can think of spirits as fully formed human personalities that only lack a material body. They can act and move.
That is actually pretty correct, I would have to say, right? Because you'll see in the Bible it talks about soul and spirit, right? Like the soul is kind of contained in the spirit. The soul is like the energy. The spirit's kind of like the personality, right? That's why you say like this person has spirit and stuff like that, right? So
Move within the warp and may lead a spiritual life amongst the other entities that live there. Sometimes a spirit will choose to be reborn in order to live out another cycle within the physical universe. When this happens, they will open themselves up to the anchor being cast by a new baby. This
like
anchor will find purchase on the spirit instead of a random mass of energy. Thus,
Kinda
the
like
spirit will reincarnate. This new incarnation of
I guess kind of like the emperor, right? But anyways,
the
I'm sorry.
spirit is a whole new person, one who will almost never have any awareness of their past lives or the time they spent within the warp, only learning the full truth of their existence after death, and once again, returning to the immaterium. Now, these are some of the strongest souls that exist, growing increasingly powerful with every incarnation. Eventually, they may attempt to communicate and pass on their knowledge through the developing souls of the still living. Sometimes a person who has reincarnated will, for one reason or another, begin to understand the truth behind their soul while still alive. This is a very slow process that can take an entire lifetime, or in reference to particularly old spirits, multiple lifetimes to achieve. This process of increasing awareness is normally accomplished through study, sorcery, religious practices, astral communication with other similar spirits, or the act of spirit walking. Now, spirit walking is the process wherein a psyker casts off their physical shell and transfers their consciousness
The Bible talks about astral projection. I'm gonna bring that up here. I'm not gonna bring it up on here, but I'm gonna look for it on my tablet here. But anyways,
from their mind into their soul. This causes their physical body to briefly fall into a coma as they reawaken within the immaterium, now existing as a spirit does. Now, this is not the same thing as dying. They don't suddenly learn everything about their past lives all at once. But through spirit walking, they may catch small glimpses, flashbacks, untraceable memories, and a sense of some things being important without fully comprehending why. Every time they do this, they may unlock another piece of the puzzle and slowly work their way towards full enlightenment. Although it may not seem like it at first, for the most part, spirit walking is considered relatively safe. The individual is always tethered to their physical body via their anchor, which
okay. So real quick, Ezekiel 13:20. Wherefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against your pillows. These are voodoo dolls and stuff like that, which there's different versions of it throughout the whole world, right? It's not just the Jamaicans, whatever. That's kind of a racist thing that people put out there. It's not just the Jamaicans. Chinese have it, all that. But anyways, I digress. I am against your pillows, wherewith ye there hunt the souls to make them fly. And I will tear them from your arms, and I will let the souls go, even the souls that ye hunt to make them fly. Astral projection, right? But anyways, so there you go.
Acts as a lifeline back to the material universe. That being said, there are still risks involved. There are creatures that exist that can detect them and sever their lifeline. Thus, it's a spirit walker's responsibility to never go too deep into uncharted depths and to be able to recognize and defeat these entities should they emerge. Whatever path or process the individual uses to get there, if they manage to become fully awakened to their past lives, this knowledge, as well as their personality, is passed on to all incarnations going forward. Thus, the individual has become effectively immortal. Our primary source here tells us that behind the scenes, such entities were referred to as immortal reincarnates. Now, how a spirit capable of reincarnation goes about initiating the process in the first place is not explicitly explained. It's
Okay, real quick, put in the comments. Is there a limit to how many times you can reincarnate in the Warhammer 40k universe? Yeah, let me know. So I'm not sure about that.
believed that it can happen in a lot of different ways, sometimes as a deliberate choice on behalf of the spirit, and other times as an unknown natural occurrence. However, sometimes the process can go horribly wrong, and we end up with what is known as fragmentation, in which the reincarnating spirit, which has opened itself up to its next incarnation, instead of having a single anchor latch onto it from a new baby, will have multiple anchors find purchase on it at the same time. Sometimes it may just be 2 or 3, but other times they could be hit by a couple of dozen anchors all at once. This causes the spirit's consciousness to fracture, as pieces of its personality, memories, power, and identity are all pulled in different directions. Thus,
Right. You do see this in people who have been said to have been demon possessed, right? You'll see them with multiple personalities, which is kind of interesting. And not all of it is the demon, right? Like their whole personalities will fracture when this happens. So kind of interesting. You know, I'm not an exorcist or an expert in that, but it is interesting that like when Jesus he's talking to the Legion, right, and says, um, "I am Legion, for we are many." So it could be many demons in these people, right? So, anyways,
leaving it in a
interesting.
weakened state. Now, people whose souls are formed from a fragment of a spirit like this will almost never have any memory of their past selves, even if this was something that the spirit had unlocked previously in a different incarnation. It's
Real quick, and then demons are the departed spirits of the Nephilim in Genesis 6, right? Talks about how angels came down, made women, blah, 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 blah. And then the book of Enoch says that the offspring of these guys, since they weren't in heaven, made in heaven, their spirits didn't come from or have that tether in heaven. They're stuck here on earth, right? And they will be forever known as evil spirits. So that's what the book of Enoch says. Oh, I'll find the chapter for you guys.
It's theoretically possible that these people could repeat the process and learn the truth behind their soul. But if they did, they would only be able to gain knowledge and insight into the portion that was assigned to them. While they're living in blissful ignorance, back in the Immaterium, the fragmenting spirit is now unable to defend itself from the ever-constant pull of the Chaos Gods and other powerful warp entities. We'll talk about them a bit more later, but to grossly oversimplify the soul of a Chaos God, it's the same thing as a spirit, just on a much more colossal scale. These giant clusters of energy are continuously attracting drifting souls and other energy aligned with their traits. When a spirit is undergoing fragmentation, it struggles to hold itself together, and thus fight off the ever-present pull of one of the 4 powers. Pieces of the spirit, i.e. bits of memory, belief, or emotion, break free and are drawn toward the associated deity. Slowly over
It is First Enoch chapter 15, right here. And the Holy Watchers is evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies. This is talking about the Nephilim, because they are born from men, and from the Holy Watchers is their beginning and primal origin. they shall be evil spirits on the earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. Okay. Enoch chapter 15.
Over time, the spirit will lose its sense of self, and its consciousness will slowly disappear. Once a spirit becomes divided through fragmentation, it's unlikely that it will ever be whole again. Now, you may be surprised to hear this, but in the grand scheme of the universe, fragmentation like this is actually a relatively new phenomena. The warp may be vast beyond human comprehension, but it's technically not infinite. There's only so much spiritual matter that exists. Under normal circumstances, the energy would be just continuously recycled through the process of life and death. But as each one of the 4 chaos gods grows ever larger, they lock up more of the warp's limited resources. Simultaneously, the ever-ballooning population of species like mankind, whose population is said to be in the quintillions by the time of the 41st millennium, is having a similar detrimental effect.
Yeah.
Now, a fragmenting spirit is one thing, but traditionally speaking, regular souls attached to a living person are not inherently at risk from the chaos gods or other malign entities. The process is not fully understood, but something about being anchored to a physical body.
I'm sure he's getting ready to talk about this. It depends, where are you putting your tether, right, per se, right? Are you putting it into the dark or the warp, or darkness in the biblical sense, right? Or are you doing it to the realm of light? In the book of Adam and Eve, which in my opinion does agree a lot with Scripture. It's an extra biblical book, but it does agree with a lot with Scripture. Now, the Cave of Treasures, I don't necessarily agree with that one, but the book of Adam and Eve does agree a lot with Scripture. But anyways, it talks about that, Satan, the obedient angel, when he was, he had a bright nature and was in the realm of light, right? And then it says that this darkness overtook him. So there's this realm of darkness as well. And then Jesus, of course, talks about the outer darkness. What is this outer darkness? Is this like a warp type thing, or stuff like that? So it is interesting. It's basically, like Stranger Things, right? You got the upside down, our world, and then the upside down, right? So anyways. And then it talks about in this land of darkness, in this land of the shadow of death, it says there's terrors in this shadow of death too, right? But this is more of talking about hell and all that. But anyways, I digress.
Either conceals the soul or renders it inaccessible. There are, however, a few exceptions to this rule. The biggest one being if the owner of that soul, knowingly or unknowingly, opened himself up to chaos. This is an act that will always draw the ruinous power's attention. The most detrimental way that this can happen is if the person starts actively worshiping the chaos gods. The act of worship itself initiating the process of exchanging pieces of their soul for power. A person doesn't have to be a full-blown heretic, though, to draw the gods' attention. It can happen just by living one's life in a way that aligns with them. In either case, once noticed, these people will be marked by one of the powers, thus increasing their soul's vulnerability. The deeper they go into their heretical practices, the more their soul will be siphoned away and consumed by their patron.
All right, so you got this mark of the beast, right? Well, what does it say? It says that the beast will sit in the temple of God and call himself God. Well, what is the temple of God, right? Well, it says, don't you know that you are the temple of God, right? And that the Spirit of God lives in you. So we are the temple of God. So think about that one. So this mark is, you're letting him into the temple, right, of God. But anyways, interesting.
When the person eventually dies, their soul will break apart like any other soul. But instead of dispersing back into the raw energy of the warp, it'll be dispersed into and become an indiscernible part of the deity itself, thus increasing the god's overall power. So what exactly is a chaos god then, and how were they originally formed? As I mentioned before, a soul breaks apart into fragments of emotion, thoughts, and ideas after its owner's death. Each of these components then drift unconsciously through the immaterium.
So that's 1 Corinthians 3:16, if you want to check that out. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you?
can sometimes happen is little bits of spiritual matter that are similar in nature will randomly bump into each other and get stuck together. These tiny masses will continue to grow larger over time as they keep bumping around and getting stuck to other bits of aligned energy. Now, this process is accelerated if there is an abundance of similar emotions within the sea of souls, and decelerates if such emotions are in short supply. Eventually, these masses will form into a sizable collective. As it grows larger and stronger, its traits are reinforced and become more extreme. At a certain point, the collective may develop a consciousness and a personality of its
There's a paralysis demon there. Sorry if that triggers anybody, but man, that would be something to see right at the, the bottom of your bed there, Ugh. Anyways,
own. If this occurs, the newly formed entity no longer has to rely on random happenstance to grow bigger and stronger. It can actively begin drawing in this material. After this, it will even gain the ability to suck in fully intact drifting souls that are similar in nature to itself. As its power continues to grow, the entity will be able to begin asserting its will on the physical universe. Now, the Immaterium is absolutely full of sentient blobs of energy like this, and most of them being relatively unimportant and going unnamed. But the four most prominent within the story of 40k, and easily the most powerful, are the Chaos Gods themselves, who feed upon the most prevalent aspects of the galaxy's intelligent species. So souls, spirits, and deities are all essentially the same thing, just to varying degrees of scale, power, and consciousness. However, a trait that is unique to the Chaos Gods is the formation of demons. Now, as each one of them represents an enormous ocean of spiritual power in their own right, they're able to freely break off portions of their raw material and exert their will over them. These little pebbles chipped from the boulder are what we call demons. As the demon is a piece of its master, it gains a personality that mirrors its creator. Now, something that is unique to demons is the ability to possess living people. But due to a person's anchor shielding them from predatory entities, it's actually pretty rare that this will happen. From the demon's perspective in the Immaterium, trying to possess a specific person would be like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a desert. There are, however, a few things that make possession a bit easier for the demon.
so basically, in the biblical sense, they kind of hit your armor, right? This is why God says, in Ephesians 6, talks about, got to put on the armor of God. First, it talks about, for we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places, right? And we got to put on this armor. Well, what they're going to try to do is keep, chinking at that armor and finding the weakness, right? And that could be from anywhere where if you mess with like a Ouija board or whatever, and you got to weaken that shield, right? And then Job talks about the hedge of protection, right? That Job had, or God had over Job. And Satan told him to relieve that hedge, and then he was able to get in there, right? He had to weaken it, and probably weaken his spirit too, right? But anyways.
Number one, if the soul in question has been marked by the demon's associated god. Number two, the individual having a particularly strong trait or emotion associated with said god. Or three, and this is the big one, the person is a psyker. When a person draws upon their soul for power, whether consciously or unconsciously, the soul will briefly flare with a release of energy. That energy then runs down the soul's anchor through the veil between universes and into the psyker's body. If a demon happens to notice this flash and moves in to study it, they can watch the path the energy takes as it travels through the soul's anchor. By traveling alongside it, they can gain entrance into the Materium and into the body of the tethered person. When this happens, the majority of the demon's spirit remains behind in the Immaterium, only a portion going into the possessed person's body. Regardless, after this occurs, it will cast the consciousness of its host out of its body back along the anchor and into the person's own soul for storage. Once a person becomes possessed like this, it is almost impossible to reverse the process. To force their way back in on their own would require a ludicrously powerful will. Now that being said, there are definitely individuals within 40k capable of doing this, like the Exorcist chapter of Space Marines that treats overcoming possession as an initiation rite. But for regular old people that are not on that level or higher, it requires outside help. namely from other powerful spirits within the Immaterium that happen to notice the compromised soul. Okay, so where does the God Emperor come into all of this? Is he the same as a Chaos God, or is he something different? Well, we don't know the full truth about what the Emperor really is, but our primary source here does give us some pretty interesting broad strokes. As far as we can tell, the Emperor has never reincarnated, which is one of the primary ways a soul continues to grow stronger. But that being said, he doesn't really need to do this. The body he was born with is virtually immortal. He's lived for tens of thousands of years, and in all that time, he grew immensely powerful. At this point, his soul is said to be a rival to the Chaos Gods, and just like them, the Emperor can grow stronger by absorbing the souls.
Okay, so I guess I was probably kind of wrong on that. I was thinking of like, the 12 shamans or the shamans, whatever, coming together. I know that's not like full lore anymore, but something to that extent. But I guess, yeah, once he became the emperor or whatever, he hasn't reincarnated because he's a perpetual. So, okay, my
Of
bad.
other people. However, this is where the whole thing about there being not enough of the warp's limited resources to go around comes in. The four Chaos Gods have already laid claim to the majority of lost and drifting souls, and most of what's left over is being used to make souls for currently living creatures. This means the only energy of any real worth left for the Emperor's soul to feed on are the remaining souls that are capable of and awaiting reincarnation, namely recently killed Psykers. Since the Emperor is still anchored to a physical body within the material universe, this process of absorption relies on both a Psyker to be sacrificed in order for their reincarnating spirit to be absorbed, and for this sacrifice to occur in close proximity to the Emperor's body. After a Psyker is killed, and before they can reincarnate, their soul is sucked through the Emperor's body or consciousness and transferred along his anchor into his soul within the Immaterium. Now, the whole time he's doing this, he's also siphoning a portion of his soul's power back into his physical body in order to keep it alive, and thus maintain a foothold in the physical universe. This process began after the Emperor was mortally wounded by his son Horus and placed upon the Golden Throne around 11,000 years ago. The lore tells us that ever since then, 1,000 Psykers a day have been sacrificed to him. However, we also know that by the time of the 41st millennia, 1,000 souls a day wasn't considered enough, and that number had increased over time, eventually reaching upwards of 3,000 souls a day. But for the sake of some good old-fashioned quick maths, we're just going to call it 1,000. So 11,000 years times 365 days times 1,000 souls a day equals 4,015,000,000 Psykers that the Emperor has merged with. There's no real way to accurately quantify this into some type of actual power level, but it gives you an idea of just how ridiculous the Emperor has become. When it comes to souls, spirits, deities, and the warp in general, there are still a lot of unanswered questions in the lore of 40k. But hopefully everything that we've covered here today gives you at least some
One thing to, and the Warhammer or 40k universe kind of has that right about this tether, right? Because, God is able to communicate, right? Probably through this tether thing, right? And we also have like things like string theory that say like the vibration like a string, right, goes to a certain spot, and then where your string goes determines on what you do, right, and stuff like that. But anyways,
background understanding of its more metaphysical elements. Before wrapping this video up though, we should briefly discuss the particular source most of this information came from. For me personally, I'm the type of person who takes everything that ever appeared in media produced by or for Games Workshop as canon until something else comes out that contradicts or overwrites it. That's always been my policy since day one, but this particular document is a weird one. It was never technically released at all. Additionally, 40k's had almost 4 decades to expand since it was originally written. It's always kind of weird when you reach back to the oldest source books to use for research, because on one hand, a lot has changed since those days, but on the other hand, oftentimes Games Workshop will introduce critically important concepts to the lore super early on, and then never talk about them again. Lord knows that was the bane of my existence when I did my Adeptus Mechanicus deep dive, and I spent way too much money on old source books and probably gave my computer at least 6 different viruses from downloading PDFs from shady websites. Anyways, I think this document in
Gotta
particular
love it.
is best used as a grounding point for understanding concepts that don't get thoroughly explained within the lore, rather than treating it as the lore itself. Honestly, I don't even technically think you can rightfully call it lore. This was an article about the lore, created by one of 40K's most influential figureheads, but still a document that was never meant to see the light of day. It was something meant to be a starting point, a skeletal framework for all of the authors that would contribute to the lore over the next 40 years. All of the ideas, concepts, characters, and events that they wrote about using this document and others like it is the actual lore. That being said, like I mentioned before, I think everything we spoke about today is canon, but it's important to remember where the information comes from in order to use it properly in your own understanding of the canon as you read the source material for yourself. But
Alrighty.
let me know what you think of all this, both all the things we talked about today and the source itself, whether or not you think it's canon or not, and what bits of lore you've read that either contradict something here or reinforce it. I'm actually
And again, I want to give credit to Games Workshop because I tell you, man, they do more research on the Bible than most Christians do. I'm pretty amazed on how well researched on the Bible they are. Right? A lot of these concepts come from the Bible, which is, of course, that's what they were looking for. And of course, other materials, pagan sources and all that stuff too as well. So it wasn't just the Bible. But I just want to give them credit because, credit where credit is due, right? But anyways.
actually pretty curious myself about the Emperor's Anchor. Now, we know he stays connected to the physical universe so he can keep the Astronomicon going, but I wonder if him being anchored gives him some type of leg up against the Chaos Gods, since spirits struggle to detect or interact with anchored souls. Also, I would leave a link to this document in the description, but I don't know what the legality of that is, considering it was a leak in the first place and it was never meant to be released. But if you just Google the exact same title of it, it's not that hard to find. Anyways, as always, leave all your questions, comments, concerns, and
all right, so we're going to end it there, guys. Real quick, I want to bring this up. This one. So, as I say all the time, don't trust any man. Don't trust a YouTuber, me. Get the information yourself, right? So, Matthew 24:5. Many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ. So they're saying Jesus Christ is the Messiah. They're not saying that they are the Christ. They're saying Jesus Christ is the Messiah. Ready? And shall deceive many. So, and this is what he says first. In verse 4, and Jesus said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. That includes a pastor, the Pope, me, YouTubers, whatever, right? It says Jesus Christ is the truth, right? So let him confirm the information to you. Get the information yourself, right? And I'm going to try to bring this up as much as possible so that way, people don't necessarily believe what I'm just saying. They go out there and they search the information yourselves, right? This isn't just for the Bible, scientific research, anything that's put out there, theories, whatever, right? You get the information yourself and look it up yourself. Do not trust any man, okay? But anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. We're going to end it there. So you guys have a wonderful day. And real quick, sorry. Thank you guys for who liked the video. And if you disliked the video, thank you for at least giving me a chance. But anyways, have a wonderful day.